So we are coming to our next point on the agenda, the gender-specific discrimination in the countries of the Western Balkans, number 12. We have invited Madame Nicole Farnsworth, Program Director, the Women's Network Kosovo, and I just would like to invite her. Highly welcome.
Thank you so much.
Thank you that you're here. Oh la la, there's nobody. Should it be? Please, I invite you to give your presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, members of Parliament, for this opportunity. It's quite an honor to follow Ms. Lambach. We're great admirers of the work that IAGA is doing, and we also draw much from their research. So I'd like to present to you some research that we have been doing at the Kosovo Women's Network, together with a coalition of 6 women's rights organizations in the Western Balkans that has been funded by the European Union with co-funding from SIDA. It's focusing on gender-based discrimination and labor in the Western Balkans. And this overall report, which is also outside on the table for you to pick up if you would like, draws from a series of individual reports from each country. In case you have interests in the specific countries, we could also share those links with you. This report was meant to establish a baseline for us because in our region very little data exists relating to gender-based discrimination in labor, though we know it is a significant problem. And this sought to collect the data we need for our advocacy and further efforts. It has involved a legal analysis, a literature review, a survey with more than 4,500 women and men in the Western Balkans. And here I must state that this was because it's a very difficult topic to get into. This is why we've used an online survey for anonymity. But because of that, it does have some bias in the findings, in that the respondents were primarily well-educated, urban employed women. So this is something we should keep in mind when looking at the findings. We also conducted in-depth interviews with women who had suffered discrimination in labor, as well as interviews with representatives of relevant institutions that are responsible for addressing the issue. I would start off with a few key findings linked to the transposition issues related to the EU, since we are EU accession countries, and this for us is a major point for advocacy when we're approaching our governments on what steps they can take to further gender equality. Several of the countries have problems with exceptions. They are not understood properly, and therefore they're not used properly. There's also an issue with victimization. There are not sufficient protections for people who have been victimized when reporting discrimination. There are not enough protections for self-employed persons. And bearing the burden of proof is also not reflected in all of the legal frameworks. There's also the standing of associations, which could be supporters for case actions on discrimination cases, but they are not protected sufficiently within the legal frameworks. And finally, you have now been talking about the work-life balance. In our region, this is a significant issue. The maternity, paternity, and parental leave are all very problematic, and none of our legal frameworks are in line with the new work-life balance directive. So there's a lot of work to be done there. The laws that we do have, of course, have significant implementation issues, and there's quite a bit of fragmentation in the legal frameworks, with discrimination being covered by laws on gender equality, discrimination, and labor, which contributes some confusion in the implementation because people are not sure which legal framework to be using. So now I would present some of the perceptions and the findings from the survey. I would start by just sharing what are the current employment rates in the Western Balkans. We can see across the Western Balkans that in all the countries, a higher percentage of men are employed than women. For example, in North Macedonia and Bosnia-Herzegovina, the gender employment gap is 19 percentage points, and in Kosovo, the gender employment gap is 29 percentage points. So in Kosovo, where I'm from, only 2 in 10 women are employed. So shall we talk a bit about discrimination now? Are you married? Do you have children? Do you plan to have children? These are the questions that most women are asked during interviews in the Western Balkans. And unfortunately, we know that employers are discriminating against women in hiring because of their families or their plans to have families. More than 50% of the respondents said they had faced discrimination in hiring. The legal framework in the Western Balkans guarantees paid maternity leave. Yet violations of maternity leave rights may be among the most prevalent forms of gender-based discrimination faced by women in the labor market. Maternity leave rights are violated either directly because employers terminate women's employment when they become pregnant, or indirectly through the use of short-term contracts because employers do not want to renew expiring contracts when they learn that women are pregnant. Among the women survey respondents who were working when they became pregnant, more than 1/5 said they do not receive any payment during the maternity leave from their employer or from the government. I lost my job due to pregnancy, and I worked for 3 years in that company. I was 4 months pregnant when I told my supervisor, and I lost my job in a week. Woman, 24, North Macedonia. Sexual harassment is also quite widespread in the Western Balkans. Every third woman responding to our survey had suffered at least one form of sexual harassment at work. The head of the company wanted to sleep with me for me to be promoted. Woman, age 30, Serbia. Although the several survey respondents had faced discrimination, very few had reported it. More than 76% did not report it to any institution. Fewer than 4% who had suffered discrimination contacted police, fewer than 3% the prosecution, fewer than 5% the courts, and fewer than 7% the ombudsperson institutions. I don't want to lose my job. That's why I endure. Woman, 47, Montenegro. Of those who do report discrimination, most contacted the labor inspectorate, but even so, they comprised less than 10% of women who had said they had experienced gender-based discrimination. The research findings suggest that most women and men in the Western Balkans tend to know that labor-related gender-based discrimination is illegal. However, people lack awareness on how to report such discrimination, and this likely contributes to underreporting. Low awareness coupled with a fear of job loss, very long court procedures, a distrust of public institutions, and poor understanding of how to properly document gender-based discrimination cases all prevent people from seeking justice. Now, I'd like to remind you what I said at the beginning, that this research draws primarily from well-educated, employed women from urban areas with access to internet. Yet 1 in 3 had suffered sexual harassment. Many had suffered gender-based discrimination in hiring. Can we even imagine what is the situation for women who are not in the same position, who are in more precarious positions? The institutional response has been weak. There is very little data kept properly by the institutions in our countries. And the low reporting obviously hampers their ability to assist people who have suffered gender-based discrimination. Thus, the institutions lack experience and knowledge. Labor inspectorates in particular lack knowledge about gender-based discrimination and how to even look into such cases. So our recommendations, we have quite a few, but I will share just a few with you today. There definitely need to be some amendments made to the legal frameworks in the Western Balkans, and we do see the EU accession process as a very timely and important process for pushing forward these amendments within our countries, particularly to amend our legislation in line with the Equal Treatment Directive, the Self-Employment Directive, and, as said earlier, the Work-Life Balance Directive as a very, very important directive towards improving the balance between women and men in the workforce in our countries. For the EU, we have recommended there is greater pressure to require the implementation of institutional reforms as part of the EU accession process as a conditionality. We believe that the EU can continue to follow this regularly and comparatively through the annual country reports for each of our countries, and can encourage the Western Balkan governments to improve their legal frameworks in line with EU directives, including the EU Work-Life Balance Directive. We also believe that there are opportunities for the EU to raise within political and policy dialogue the issues raised within our reports in addressing discrimination and amending the legal framework. It's also very important for us, whenever parliamentarians visit our countries, that they visit with women's rights groups. This also gives us a lot of publicity and empowers our work. And to this isn't a direct link, but indirectly, we believe it's quite important looking towards the new MFF. When we come into looking at the current common implementing regulation, to see how external financing could be better gender mainstreamed. Right now, the common implementing regulation does not have a clear gender perspective. It's very vague. If you were to go into the common implementing regulation and gender mainstream it, which we have done on a paper that I share with you outside, there could be many opportunities for requiring the Commission to push all beneficiaries of EU funding to further gender mainstream their work through mandatory gender impact analysis, which EGE has very good guidelines on. And these are recommendations that have also been raised by the FEMM committee previously in the report that was written by MEP Moody, which called for gender-specific indicators to be applied in project selection, monitoring and evaluation of all actions funded by the EU. We have the EU Gender Action Plan too, but it doesn't have enough teeth. We really need to get these types of requirements institutionalized within the common implementing regulations so that they will be applied. And we have shared some thoughts on how that can be done, again, outside on our paper. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for your interesting presentation. So somehow, of course, we know the situation on employment in general is not so easy in Western Balkan countries. And we just see them as a conclusion who is suffering most. It's first of all always women who just suffer from discrimination in all fields you were mentioning. And also thank you very much for the link already reminding us new members in this committee to what has been done already from by previous members like Claire Moody on this issue. So I just really would like to thank you very much. Lydia Jaroka, you would like to ask a question, please.
I would also like to thank you very much. I'm very sorry for being late. I went to the wrong room. I'm really sorry. But I know the field, I know your research, and I would like to follow up on some of your findings and some of the experiences that we had in the same field in the old accession countries in Eastern Europe. Because that time, multiplied discrimination was high, minority rights were low, so we had to defend those women who in the post-communist era left their or lost their jobs. For 30 years they were not in the labor market. Now they are missing from the labor market. Some of the countries are in labor shortage. And because so many left from the Western Balkans already, and if we keep them poor there, they will leave as soon as accession happened. So they are losing the wonderful workforce, also in the young generation, but also in the elderly. In the end, elderly, because they didn't have jobs for 30 years, no pensions are going to wait for them. So there are so many multi-sectional, sectional relations which should be solved at the same time, and somehow I feel that in the Western Balkan, though we put into the 2011 Roma strategy the Western Balkan as a 6th chapter to make sure that anti-poverty strategies are helping the countries, but from the last few years' experience we find that it's much slower, just as much in Eastern Europe. So in the Western Balkans, we definitely, and I'm happy that you have a section around the 40th page on minority rights and poverty-related issues to that, and the tools how to change the situation. And what I said, if you let me speak one more minute, about the good experiences, that not only in trafficking, segregation in education, or using the race directive well, asking for the pre-accession good conditions to be fulfilled. We could do so much already, using the IPA money much better. Just a few days ago, I was honored to meet the EU trafficking coordinator, and the knowledge and the commitment which is there, we have to follow up on this, and I hope that this committee will be able to assist not only through the MMF, but maybe also through an own initiative report bringing up poverty, child rights, multiplied discrimination. And there are some very special issues to the Balkans that which were not solved, not really ethnic issues, but there are tragics like cyan leaking in Kosovo, where kids are being born with cancer already because the water is contaminated, or, as I said, trafficking, organ trafficking, violence inside of the family, patriarchism, no educational opportunities to higher education, no good schemes to work and life balance together. So the changes are very quick, it will be in this region, and very soon these countries will be shortage of work. Many of the future workers are coming from very poor families, though they have so many future workers. So if we don't put emphasis in the very early education of them, building up factories for the parents, and start and reaching the local communities with good leadership and good local leaders and good EU projects from the IPA, then these numbers are going to raise, I think. And also, I think we don't use the existing rules, tools well, because for your report now, using the race directive well, I know that it's in the Balkans, it's not yet in that stage as it is in the member states, but we could solve so many problems already when it comes to anti-Gypsyism, discrimination, labor discrimination, especially if we need this labor force so well. We should train them so well. Thank you very much for your work.
Thank you very much. Would you like to answer? Sure. Yes, please.
I'm happy you raised the other issues. I mean, I was presenting on gender-based discrimination labor, but we have also just been earlier this week at the Friends of Europe conference and elsewhere raising other very important issues, which childcare, I would say, is one of the most fundamental issues, as Ms. Lambeck also presented earlier, together with addressing informality and occupational stereotypes. These are also very important issues. I just want to comment on the issue of better budgeting. I know it's quite early in the process of the MFF, but one thing that could be considered that we had started discussing with prior members of the FEMM committee was how perhaps there could be some earmarking of finances under the IPA portfolio that would focus specifically on gender equality as a sub-budget line. For example, this could include earmarked funding for shelters and service providers, which are currently being co-opted by the state and not allowing for anonymity and appropriate protection of women who've suffered violence. So perhaps putting such a budget line in the MFF under the IPA would earmark these funds for women's rights groups who are qualified to provide these services in the future and ensure that these services are provided in accordance with the Istanbul Convention. So this could be one specific thing to look into down the road. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So somehow you give us already food for the upcoming work, and I think it's a very good moment to do this. So this committee is very open-minded to your contributions in this regard. I would like to thank you very much. God is a Woman, her name is Petrunia. That was the film from Northern Macedonia, who won the Lux Film Prize last week, who is also really having a spotlight on issues you mentioned, of course, in a way of a very beautiful film. So just would like to conclude your presentation with a positive outlook, what is possible. So thank you very much. Thanks so much. Thank you. And with this, we're coming to the end of our committee. So the next meeting of the committee will be on the 22nd, 23rd of January next year, 2020. Thank you very much. I wish you a good journey back, and thanks to the interpreters.